Get started. We're talking about the roots of false religion. So everything I thought about this before this last week has been blown away. And so let me get this book. Okay, this book has probably changed Christianity. I used to refer to it all the time. It's called The Two Babylons. It's basically recommended by many pastors as a concise history of how world religion began. In all my research, I came to find out that this book has been defrocked. It's none of the information in it is real, but it is still held by most of the evangelical world as being accurate. Basically, what it says the two Babylons, or the papal worship, proved to be the worship of Nimrod and his wife. So the axe to grind in this book is to prove that Nimrod, who was the first kind of big ruler of the world, and his wife Semerimis and their son Tamuz became the unholy trinity. And that was spread to all of the pagan religions of the world. That since has been made up to be false. The whole goal of Bishop Hislock was to prove that Catholicism incorporated Mary as the Queen of Heaven, which is what Semerimis's role was, and he tries to prove that, but there's no evidence for it whatsoever. So he basically was trying to take down the Catholic Church. He didn't really have to do that. Catholic Church pretty much worships Mary now, ancestor worship, and calls her the Queen of Heaven, which is based upon the person of Semiramis, but she didn't live until well after Nimrod had died, probably by 2,000 years. So Semerimis is still an important character, as we'll find out, but this is not to be trusted. So if you have it, or you're going to get it, or recommended it, don't buy it.
Well, we have it.
Okay. So this is tying all this together. We'll be able to tie it together for you, and you'll be able to see the relevance, but it's a confusing ball of goo of how the ancient world came together with false religion. But basically, the Bible teaches that all false religion comes out of Babylon, and that the world will worship all forms of religion in the form of Babylon, according to Revelation chapter 17. So we're going to take a look at that tonight. Start with, let's go to Acts chapter 17. Paul is shown up in Athens, Greece, where he's just appalled by all the gods he sees there. It's just literally statues of gods, temples of gods everywhere. And someone just go and start in verse 22 and read all the way to verse 31 of Acts chapter 17.
So Paul stood in the midst of the Areopagus and said, "Men of Athens, I observe that you are very religious in all respects. For while I was passing through and examining the objects of your worship, I also found an altar with this inscription: to an unknown God. Therefore, what you worship in ignorance, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and all things in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all people life and breath in all things. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on the face of the earth, having determined their appointed times and the boundaries of their habitation, that they would seek God, if perhaps they might grope for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and exist, as if some of your own poets have said. For we also are his children. Being then the children of God, we ought to not think that the divine nature is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and thought of man. Therefore, having overlooked the times of ignorance, God is now declaring to men that all people everywhere should repent, because he has fixed a day in which he will judge the world in righteousness through a man who he has appointed, having furnished proof to all men by raising him from the dead.
Okay, so Paul, the Greeks wanted to make sure they had everything covered. So if they didn't have all the gods, they just made one statue that said, "To the unknown God." Let's just worship that, whoever he is. Let's make sure that we don't miss any gods. But the main thing he said is that God does not dwell in temples made with hands, and basically showing that man had invented God in his in the way that he thought about him, and that he also says that God is not gold or silver or anything that man is formed by his thoughts or in art. So he pretty much covers false religion there. Now, the important thing here is to come up here and take a look at verse 26. It says, and he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on the face of the earth, having determined their appointed times and the boundaries of their habitation. When did God determine the boundaries of man's habitation? When did that happen?
Tower of Babel.
Tower of Babel. God divided the planet. And then it says why he did that. God divided the planet and separated man on the four corners of the earth that they might see God. Perhaps they might grope for him and find him. So God wanted man to be in a place of groping. What does that mean? Man began to, number one, man began to grope. That's the word salatheo, which means to feel or touch. And so God then divided the boundaries so that men would grope. They would be weak for God, is the point. Go to Luke chapter 24. God did not want man to be independent and strong so that he wouldn't need God. Let's go to Luke 24. Someone read verse 39.
See my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Touch me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have.
All right, so that word touch me, see my hands and touch me is the word grope. Grope me, feel, touch. Go to John chapter 1, right next door, and oh wait, this is it's 1 John 1, I believe. Go to 1 John. Not John 1, I believe it's 1 John 1. And someone read verse 1 of 1 John 1.
What was from the beginning, what we have heard, what we have seen with our eyes, what we have looked at and touched with our hands concerning the word of life.
What we have groped with our hands. The groping of the disciples in figuring out that Jesus Christ had risen from the dead. That's the groping. They were in a total area of despair, and they found God through the groping of Jesus Christ, which is symbolic about groping. So why did God set boundaries at Babel? What did Babel represent? Mankind did not trust God's promise with man. Go to Genesis chapter 9. What did God promise after the flood?
That we would never be flooded again.
Yeah, right there. Genesis 9 verse 8 says, then God spoke to Noah and to his sons with him, saying, now behold, I myself do establish my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with everything, every living creature that's with you, the birds, cattle, every burst of the earth with you, of all that comes out of the ark, every beast, establish my covenant with you, and all flesh shall never again be cut off by the water of the flood. Neither shall there again be a flood to destroy the earth. So go to Genesis 11. And someone read verses 1 through 9.
Now the whole earth used the same language and the same words. It came about as they journeyed east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. They said to one another, come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they used brick for stone, and they used tar for mortar. They said, come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower whose top will reach into heaven. And let us make for ourselves a name. Otherwise we will be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. The Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. The Lord said, behold, there are one people, and they all have the same language. And this is what they begin to do. And now nothing which they propose to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, so that they will not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of the whole earth, and they stopped building the city. Therefore, its name was called Babel, because the Lord confused the language of the whole earth. And from there, the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of the whole earth.
Okay, so they were proud. They basically, by uniting together and building a monument, the people united and found comfort in their accomplishments and pride rather than God. So God made them gropers to eliminate their pride and eliminate their confidence. Here's what by the way, this is the first civilization is in this area. It's in Mesopotamia, it's in Iraq, and it was called the land of Sumer, also the land of Shinar. By the way, the word Semerimis ends up being translated to called the land of Shinar. So that's why a lot of people say that she was there at the beginning, but she wasn't. And she became what's known as the Queen of Heaven in the worship of a female god. So let's see what Josephus says about this. Can you guys see that?
No.
Okay, this is a new share.
I think you just have to exit out of full screen and click on the one you're looking at.
Now you can see it, right?
No. Oh,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah.
Okay, look at this. The Works of Josephus. This is a Jewish Roman general in the 1st century. I believe that the true history of religion comes from these texts. No one teaches this, but we need to listen to the history of the historians of that time to piece together what happened in religion. According to the Works of Josephus, now the sons of Noah were 3, Shem, Japheth, and Ham, born 100 years before the deluge. These first of all descended from the mountains into the plains and fixed their habitation there, and persuaded others who were greatly afraid of the lower grounds on the account of the flood. And so were very loath to come down from the higher places to venture to follow their examples. Now the plain in which they first dwelt was called Shinar. God also commanded them to send colonies abroad for the thorough peopling of the earth. That's what God had told Noah, right? Replenish the earth. That they might cultivate a great part of the earth and enjoy its fruits after the plentiful manner. But they were so ill instructed that they did not obey God, for which reason they fell into calamities and were made sensible by experience of what they had been guilty. For when they flourished with the numerous youth, God admonished them again to send out colonies, but they, imagining the prosperity they enjoyed was not derived from the favor of God, but supposing that their own power was the proper cause of plentiful condition they were in, did not obey him. Nay, they added to their disobedience to the divine will the suspicion that they were therefore ordered to send out separate colonies, that being divided asunder, they might more easily be oppressed. Now it was Nimrod who excited them to such an affront and contempt of God. He was the grandson of Ham, the son of Noah, a bold man and a great strength of hand. He persuaded them not to ascribe it to God, as if was through his means they were happy, but to believe that there was their own courage which procured that happiness. He also gradually changed the government into tyranny, seeing no other way of turning men from fear of God, but to bring them to a constant dependence on his power. He also said he would be revenged on God if he should have a mind to drown the world again. For that he would build a tower too high for the waters to be able to reach, and that he would avenge himself on God for destroying their forefathers. Interesting. So he believes that he built the tower so God couldn't drown them again, which means, of course, they did not believe God or listen to God.
Right.
Okay, so the new share. Oops. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. Sumer, the first religion after Babel, was located in Iraq, which I already said. The first god in Babylon was Inanna, was the god of love, sex, war, and later sky, which turns into storm god. These are the four things that affect all of pagan religion: sex, war, the sky, storms. All of these are related to all of the religions of the world. as far as the gods. This was adopted by the Akkadians and the Babylonians and the Assyrians. Now, the Akkadians, the Babylonians, and the Assyrians, this is the order that they show up. And all of these three cultures are in Babylon or in Iraq. They all started in the same place. So this god Liana was established under the name Ishtar. It was adopted by the Canaanites as Astarte, which means Queen of Heaven. Go to Jeremiah 44. Does anyone know why the Catholic Church adopted Mary? They claimed her the mother of God, and that she was co-redemptress. They called her the co-redemptress or co-redeemer of man. Does anyone understand what the purpose of that was? The idea was that a male god cannot understand nurturing and all the things that a female god could understand. So it provided a way for people to pray to a nurturing God, which is Mary, and she's actually become more popular than God the Father in the sense, and that's what the ancient world was doing too, worshiping women for the purpose of representing also fertility. And then we'll talk about the bull in a moment, what that represented. So basically, starting means Queen of Heaven. Jeremiah 44, 15 through 19. Someone read that.
And all the men who were aware that their wives were burning sacrifices to other gods, along with all the women who were standing by as a large assembly, including all the people who were living in Pathros in the land of Egypt, responded to Jeremiah, saying, "As for the message that you have spoken to us in the name of the Lord, we are not going to listen to you, but rather we will certainly carry out every word that has proceeded from our mouths by burning sacrifices to the Queen of Heaven and pouring out drink offerings to her, just as we ourselves, our forefathers, our kings, and our princes did in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem. For then we had plenty of food and were well off and saw no misfortune. But since we stopped burning sacrifices to the Queen of Heaven and pouring out drink offerings to her, we have lacked everything and have met our end by the sword and by famine." And said the women, "When we were burning sacrifices to the Queen of Heaven and were pouring out drink offerings to her, was it without our husbands that we made for her sacrificial cakes in her image and poured out drink offerings to her?"
Yeah, it basically was saying we as women were doing this without our husbands. We sacrificed cakes to the Queen of Heaven. So these women found solace in worshiping the Queen of Heaven, which basically was part of Canaanite worship as Astarte. And then basically Hadad became the storm god in Canaan, and he was adopted from Babylon. Then Marduk, who was the head god of Babylon, became Baal. And all of these are Hadad, who is a storm god, Marduk is the storm god, and Baal is also a storm god, all represented by the bull. The bull represents virility, male fertility, and basically also the power of the king. So that's why they adopted the bull as a god. And if
Real
you go
quick,
to
Ralph, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but how do you make a sacrificial cake? What is that? I've never even heard of that before.
well, the sacrificial cake would be to make a cake that you I don't know. I guess you make this cake.
What kind of cake?
It's something you
What
eat.
kind of cake do you have to make for it to be a
I guess
sacrificial
it's
cake?
the intention of the cake.
Yeah. Basically, that's where the term comes from. Let them eat cake. No, just kidding.
Well, is it kind of like I guess it's not like manna, like a communion, right?
It's
They're
kind of
giving
a
up.
communion. Yeah, it's kind of a communion because you're
Yeah.
eating cake. I'll have
So
to
maybe
look
that's what the cake is giving it up, communion, making those cakes and offering them up. I don't know.
It says that there's sacrificial cakes in her image. So they made like life-size cakes
Right.
of the image of the god and then sacrificed those. That's very interesting.
Yeah, then they poured out offerings to her also. So they must have also eaten the cake. And so I don't know. I have to look that up and see what the purpose of the cakes were in relation to that.
They're getting real creative.
Okay, so what is the essence of the bull? Let's take a look at that for a moment. Go to Exodus 32. And someone just read verses 1 through 4.
Now, when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people assembled about Aaron and said to him, "Come, make us a god who will go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." Aaron said to them, "Tear off the gold rings which are in the ears of your wives, your sons and your daughters, and bring them to me." Then all of the people tore off the gold rings which were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. He took this from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made it into a molten calf. And they said, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt."
All right. He turned it into a molten calf, which is a mini bull. So the very first sin that Israel commits is to worship the bull of all of these pagan nations that started from the very beginning. First thing they do to defy God.
That way the bull has a nose ring.
Yeah. It's one of the reasons. Besides also a beard. The bulls have beards. If you were to go and just look up the original bull, all these winged griffin bulls are in this big tower in Iraq still today. They're big, huge. You've seen them before. They border the temple, and they're huge bulls that are just sitting there with their beards. Go to 1 Kings 12, 25 through 33. This is after Israel is divided. Keep that in mind. You have the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom. Look what Jeroboam did. Go ahead and read it starting verse 25.
Then Jeroboam built Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim, and lived there. And he went out from there and built Peniel. Jeroboam said in his heart, "Now the kingdom will return to the house of David. If this people go up to offer sacrifices in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, then the heart of this people will return to their Lord, even to Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they will kill me and return to Rehoboam," sorry if I'm getting that wrong, "king of Judah." So the king consulted and made 2 golden calves, and he said to them, "Is it too much for you to go up to Jerusalem? Behold your gods, O Israel, that brought you up from the land of Egypt." He set one in Bethel, and the other he put in Dan. Now this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one as far as Dan. And he made up houses on high places and made priests from among all the people who were not the sons of Levi. Jeroboam instituted a feast in the 8th month of the 15th day of the month, like the feast which is in Judah. And he went up to the altar, thus he did in Bethel, sacrificing to the calves which he had made. And he stationed in Bethel the priests of the high places which he had made.
Okay, so where's the only place you can worship in the Bible, in the Old Testament?
In
Temple.
The temple in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
So Jeroboam is afraid that people are going to go to Judah because he's part of the northern kingdom. Judah's part of the southern kingdom. And so he sets up 2 separate locations, not only for the people in the north to go to, which would be Dan, but he also put one in the south in Bethel so that the people of Judah could go there and worship these calves, which are, again, golden bulls. And on top of that, the priests were not Levites, so everything is wrong about this. Go to 2 Kings 17. So does everyone see the importance of the original bulls and then those being exported into Israel as part of false religion?
So you're saying it's just because they represent fertility and
Virility, fertility, yeah. Well, basically, yeah, and this became a popular form of worship. These people, the calves represent in this case Jeroboam's virility and his great accomplishments. You know, a bull being very powerful, that's representative of him. So they're technically worshiping him because that's what the bulls represented, was the king in all these places.
okay.
So go 2 Kings 17, 7 through 18.
Now this came about because the sons of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them from the land of Egypt under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and they had feared other gods and walked in the customs of the nations whom the Lord had driven out before the sons of Israel, and in the customs of the kings of Israel which they had introduced. The sons of Israel did things secretly, which were not right against the Lord their God. Moreover, they built for themselves high places in all their towns, from watchtower to fortified city. They set for themselves sacred pillars and ashram on every high hill and under every green tree. And there they burned incense on all the high places as the nations did, which the Lord had carried away to exile before them. And they did evil things, provoking the Lord. They served idols, concerning which the Lord had said to them, "You shall not do this thing." Yet the Lord warned Israel and Judah through all of his prophets and every seer, saying, "Turn from your evil ways and keep my commandments, my statutes, according to all the law which I commanded your fathers, and which I sent to you through my servants the prophets." However, they did not listen, but stiffened their neck like their fathers, who did not believe in the Lord their God. They rejected his statutes and his covenant which they made with their fathers, and his warnings in which he warned them. And they followed vanity and became vain, and went after the nations which surrounded them, concerning which the Lord had commanded them not to do like them. They forsook all the commandments of the Lord their God, and made for themselves molten images, even 2 calves, and made an Asherah, and worshipped all the hosts of heaven, and served Baal. Then they made their sons and daughters pass through the fire, and practiced divination and enchantments, and sold themselves to do evil things in the sight of the Lord, provoking him. So the Lord was very angry with Israel and removed them from his sight. None was left except the tribe of Judah.
This passage of scripture lists all the sins that are all through the Old Testament. All of them are listed here, only here in this passage of scripture, of all the things they did, including the molten calves and the passing through fire. What they did is sacrifice their babies to the god Moloch. That's what passing through fire is. The Moloch was in the valley of Gehenna. That's where all of these statues were of Moloch. They would basically build fires till his bronze hands became completely red hot, and then they would place their babies on them.
Oh my
And the valley of Gehenna was so corrupted with it that the king decided to make it a dumping ground to stop the worship of Moloch. And that's where Israel started burning all their refuge in the valley of Gehenna, which is Christ described as hell, to stamp out the worship of Moloch. So very fascinating stuff.
I just do not understand how it gets so extreme. Like God says don't do this, and they immediately go to the worst possible thing.
Well, it's because they kept foreigners. Obviously, the foreigners taught them these things, and these foreigners who taught them these things were enslaved in Israel. Their nations were conquered. But that's why God said, kill every man, woman, and child, or so you won't be corrupted by their deeds. So I would remember this passage as an important one if you ever want to take a look at what the sins of Israel were and all of the things that they were doing. These are all of the gods they worship, but mainly the bulls and Moloch were the ones that God points out. Now Moloch, He was also a Canaanite god and also a bull. And today, Moloch represents, believe it or not, the bull Taurus is Moloch in astrology. That is the bull Moloch.
Wow.
Taurus.
That's what I'm gonna say now. Whenever everybody always wants to bring it up, what's your sign? I mean, like I kind of just shy away from it because I'm like, I don't care. I want to have peace with all men. But now I can just be like, hey, Taurus represents a demon called Moloch. I'm not sure if you know that, but I do not subscribe to that.
Yeah. All right. So go to Psalm 106 and looking at the details of Moloch. And take Psalm 106, 37 through 38.
They even sacrificed their sons and their daughters to the demons and shed innocent blood, the blood of their sons and daughters and their daughters, whom they sacrificed to the idols of Canaan. And the land was polluted with the blood. Thus they became unclean in their practices and played the harlot of their deeds.
Okay, I wanted to point this out because you can see that even though that Moloch is a god of Canaan, okay, and that Moloch or any god represents, according to 37, demons. That those gods are demons.
So do you think that these people were possessed when they were sacrificing their sons and daughters and stuff, or they were doing it like on their own will?
Who knows? I'm sure some of them were possessed and some of them followed the crowd, but certainly when you're worshiping demons, that's what happens. And of course, Revelation chapter 9 makes it clear that in the end, people will do the works and worship demons at the end times. It all goes back to the same thing.
Ugh, it's gonna be so horrible.
Jeremiah 32:35, I'll just read that one, says, they built the high places of Baal that are in the valley of Behinnom. That's the valley of Gehenna, same thing. To cause their sons and daughters to pass through the fire of Moloch, which I had not commanded them, nor had I entered my mind that they should do this abomination. God didn't even think about it. That's how terrible it was. And they did it in the valley of Gehenna, according to this. Now, the bull also spread to Egypt and is known today as Apis the bull. So that is also spread there. Herodotus, the father of history, of 484 BC, said that the temple Marduk represented the Tower of Babel, tying the bull to the earliest gods. Marduk, Herodotus said there was a ziggurat that used to be called the Tower of Babel. It wasn't probably the original one, but it was in that temple. They put the god Marduk in the temple of the Tower of Babel. Go to Jeremiah 50:1 and 2.
The word which the Lord spoke concerning Babylon, the land of the Chaldeans, through Jeremiah the prophet, declared. Oh, wait, am I in the wrong spot?
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, declare and proclaim among the nations, proclaim it and lift up a standard. Do not conceal it, but say, Babylon has been captured. Bel has been put to shame. Marduk has been shattered. Her images have been put to shame. Her idols have been shattered. For a nation has come up against her out of the north. It will make her land to an object of horror, and there will be no inhabitant in it. Both man and beast have wandered off. They have gone away.
Okay, so I wanted to make sure that you understand I'm not making this up. These scriptures are tying these gods to these cities in the Bible. Marduk is tied to Babylon. Now, Baal became Zeus in Greek, in Greeks. He's the head god in Greek pantheon. He's also, guess what, the storm god. We're going to talk about the importance of the storm god, why it keeps coming up. Hadad, number D, was also the storm god in Canaan, who also came from Babylon. Hadad was a very powerful god. You don't hear about him a lot, but he's also the storm god. Baal became Jupiter in Rome, the head god in the Roman pantheon. Guess what? Jupiter is, guess what? The storm god. Baal became Seth in Egyptian pantheon, the god of war, killed and mutilated his brother, was also the god of chaos, same as Satan, became associated with Mercury. Here's what's interesting. The root word of Mercury means, guys, boundaries. Set became Hermes in Greece. Hermes in Greek also means boundaries, Herma. So you have the worship of a god who basically worship boundaries. Now, if you know,
What does that mean? Worshipped boundaries. What do you mean?
the worship of what God had done is that, well, boundaries when you work at these gods, what it works out to is that these gods were the gods of travel.
Oh, okay.
Safe travel, which entails crossing boundaries.
Okay.
Okay. So the idea was that people remembered the scattering and the boundaries, and so they created these gods for safe travel. And everyone knows that when Mercury's in retrograde, is that a good thing?
Mm-mm.
Mercury in retrograde is a bad thing. Bad things happen to you. So bad things are related to Mercury in retrograde, which is reverse bad boundaries, very bad boundaries. Okay, so what's the summary here? The first god was delegated to other countries and primarily identified with sex, war, storm, and sky, and then boundaries. That's basically the essence of pagan worship. As a way to defy God's boundary creation, Mercury represents boundaries, and Mercury in retrograde is a bad thing, communicating that God's boundaries are a bad thing. The original gods began with the worship of gods that represented war and sex primarily and spread throughout bull worship, which was Inanna, the first god in Sumer, the first god of anywhere. The god of chaos became connected to defy the boundaries of man and to glorify war through war gods as a means of taking over boundaries. That's what war is about, right? Taking other people's countries.
Yeah.
God of chaos is joined to Mercury or boundaries. Baal, a golden calf from the very beginning, and Baal became the overriding lord of all Western religions since in the form of a bull. Animism, which is primitive people's religion, American Indians and undeveloped Africa, there is a spirit in every living thing and non-living thing, and all objects in the world are alive. Gaia, goddess of the earth or Mother Nature, even scientists have suggested that the earth is taking some form of revenge against us in the sense that nature is alive, which is basically what science is actually starting to teach. Ancestor worship and veneration. This is Catholicism because now they worship Mary, which is ancestor worship. Indians do ancestor worship. China and Southeast Asia and parts of Africa. The biggest religion in the world is ancestor worship. Prometheus, the god of fire, which represents Moloch, was the father of Deucalion. Deucalion, folks, was Noah. Zeus, actually came to destroy the earth with a flood and appointed Deucalion to administer the flood. Deucalion became a god. So that was the worship of Noah. And folks, what does Noah represent? Ready? Oh, you can't see it.
Storm.
Noah's the storm god. All the storms and the heads of gods who are storms was to worship these gods because of the storm which destroyed the planet. And so the storms and the storm god became important to appease, to make sure that man would not be flooded out again. Worship of man, science, Hinduism, which is man is God. Buddha, man becomes enlightened or a god. This is in India, Japan, and Southeast Asia. And then we have the Christian cults, which represent certainly false gods, Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses. And then we have planet worship or astrology, which is worshiping the host of heaven, worshiping demons. And we saw in that passage of scripture in 2 Kings 17 that the worshiping of the host of heavens was the last thing that God mentioned, which is astrology. Now watch this. This is interesting. Let's talk about American paganism. Now, when I do this, well, I'm not sure it will share the screen. Is it sharing the screen?
Yeah.
Does that come up?
Starting. It's uploading.
Can you see it?
Yeah. Congressional Medal of Honor Society.
You guys, congrats. Okay, hold on a second. Does everyone see this now?
No, yeah.
Now everyone sees it, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Statue of Liberty.
Okay, watch this. This is a website. It won't. Okay, here we go. Hopefully this will come up in a second. Okay, see this? This is the Medal of Honor. You know who that is?
The Pantheon?
That's-
No.
That's Minerva, which represents the god Athena.
Just a guess.
That's the Army Medal of Valor. Let's look at the Air Force. Okay, let's read this. Presently, there are 3 variations of Medal of Honor. See for symbolism. The medal has become a historic symbol of our nation out of respect for those who have died. Okay, now when I click on this, this is Lady Liberty. The Statue of Liberty is centered in the Air Force design. In addition to standing for liberty, she's derived from the imagery of Queen Semerimis of Babylon, who was famed for her beauty, strength, and wisdom. So on the Air Force's Medal of Honor, the highest honor we can give is basically the veneration of Queen Semerimis
Wow.
in the United States.
Wow.
On top of that,
Statue of Liberty is
how
many?
these rays on her head, how many spikes is that?
7.
7?
Yeah.
7-pointed star and a ray, which also is connected to Semerimis's crown and to all the crowns of the ancient gods that you can find in hieroglyphics in Egypt. So if you were to go to the Capitol today, if you ever went to the Capitol, right, Natalie?
Mm-hmm.
When you go into the Capitol building, of course, the god Minerva, which is Libertas, is on the top of the Capitol building. Minerva represents Athena, and Athena is represented by Semiramis, the god Athena. Minerva and Athena are the same thing, and that sits on top of their Capitol building today. If you go to our Capitol today and go inside, you'll see all kinds of pagan symbols in it. There's a whole book on it about all the pagan symbols that exist in our Capitol that are right there. And of course, on our coins and on all our medals, we have Roman and Greek gods as part of the veneration of our, how we venerate and show, I mean, veneration is and is to put these symbols on your money and to put them certainly on your highest medals ever. So paganism has affected the whole world. And I just found this